The great assembly hall of the Galactic Council stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian floor, its crystalline dome reaching toward the stars of the Andromeda sector. Representatives from 473 species filled the tiered seating arrangements, each designed to accommodate the unique physiological requirements of beings that had evolved on worlds spanning half the galaxy. The air itself was a carefully maintained mixture of gases that could sustain most oxygen-breathing species, while specialized atmosphere pockets provided for those who required methane, hydrogen sulfide, or the rare few who breathed pure nitrogen. Ambassador Thane Morrison stood at the human delegation's modest seating area, watching the assembled representatives with careful attention. Humans had been granted membership in the Galactic Council only 18 months prior, making them the newest and most scrutinized species in the assembly. Their section consisted of merely 12 seats, a stark contrast to the Zephyrian Empire's sprawling delegation of over 200 representatives, or the ancient crystalline collective's towering spires that housed their silicon-based consciousness matrices. The human delegation was small, almost insignificant in the vast chamber. Besides Morrison, there was Dr. Sarah Chun, the chief scientific advisor, General Marcus Webb, military liaison, Captain Lisa Rodriguez, representing the human space fleet, and 8 other carefully selected individuals who represented various aspects of human civilization. They had been chosen not for their political connections or wealth, but for their competence, their ability to think under pressure, and their deep understanding of what humanity truly represented among the stars. High Chancellor Vextar of Hegemony called the assembly to order with a resonating tone that vibrated through the crystalline walls. The Chancellor stood 4 meters tall, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming with bioluminescent patterns that indicated his elevated status among the insectoid species that dominated the galactic political landscape. His compound eyes swept across the assembly with practiced authority, pausing briefly on the human section with what could only be described as disdain. Esteemed delegates, Vextar's voice echoed through the chamber's translation matrix, converting his clicking mandibles into comprehensible speech for all species present. We gather today to address the growing concern of territorial expansion in the Outer Rim sectors. Several species have reported unauthorized settlements and resource extraction operations in systems that fall under the protection of the Galactic Accords. Morrison felt the weight of hundreds of alien gazes turning toward the human delegation. It was no secret that humanity had been aggressively expanding their presence in the galaxy since achieving faster-than-light travel 47 years ago. What had started as desperate colonization efforts to relieve Earth's overcrowded population had evolved into a systematic exploration and settlement program that had established human presence in over 300 systems. The accusations came quickly, as Morrison had expected they would. Delegate Zur-ADH of the Aquatic Federation rose from her specialized water tank, her tentacles undulating with agitation. The humans continue to encroach upon systems that have been designated as buffer zones between established territorial boundaries. Their expansion shows complete disregard for the careful balance we have maintained for over 2 millennia. A chorus of agreement rippled through the assembly. The Avian Consortium's representative, a magnificent creature with iridescent feathers and piercing golden eyes, spread his wings in a gesture of support. Furthermore, he screeched, his translator struggling with the harsh consonants of his language. These newcomers refused to acknowledge the established protocols for resource sharing and territorial designation. They act as if the galaxy belongs to them alone. Morrison remained seated, his hands folded calmly in his lap. Dr. Chun leaned over to whisper urgently, "Thane, we need to respond. They're building a case for sanctions." The human ambassador raised his hand slightly, a subtle gesture that nonetheless caught the attention of the Chancellor. But before he could speak, Prince Nexval of the Eternal Dynasty stood, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into brilliant rainbows. The ancient being's voice resonated like chimes in a gentle breeze, carrying the authority of a species that had dominated galactic politics for over 50,000 years. Honored Chancellor, Prince Nexval began, his words measured and deliberate. I believe we must address the fundamental question that troubles this assembly. The humans, despite their recent admission to our council, continue to behave as if they are unaware of the delicate balance that governs civilized space. Their expansion is not merely aggressive, it is primitive. The word primitive hit the chamber like a physical force. Morrison felt General Webb tense beside him, the military man's discipline warring with his natural urge to defend humanity's honor. But Morrison remained still, allowing the prince to continue. Consider their approach to planetary colonization. Prince Nexval continued, his form shifting through different crystalline configurations as he spoke. Where established species carefully negotiate with existing ecosystems, seeking harmony and balance, humans simply arrive. They transform entire worlds to suit their biological requirements, showing little regard for indigenous life forms or the natural order that has existed for millions of years. Delegate Administrator Kylos of the Merchant Guild, a squat, heavily muscled being with 4 arms and skin that shifted color with his emotions, stepped forward. His skin had turned a deep purple, indicating strong agreement. The prince speaks truth. Human trade practices are equally concerning. They offer technologies and resources without proper consideration for market stability. Their willingness to share advanced medical techniques and manufacturing processes with developing species disrupts carefully maintained economic relationships. The assembly erupted in a cacophony of alien voices, translation matrices working overtime to convert the multitude of languages into comprehensible speech. Morrison could see the pattern forming. This was not a random discussion about territorial disputes. This was a coordinated effort to isolate humanity, to brand them as disruptive to the established galactic order. High Priestess Salandra of the Spiritual Confluence rose from her meditation platform, her ethereal form barely visible to most species, but radiating a presence that commanded immediate attention. When she spoke, her voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The humans possess something that disturbs the natural flow of cosmic energy. Their very presence creates disturbances in the spiritual fabric of space. Where other species achieve expansion through patience and contemplation, humans seem driven by an uncontrollable urge to spread across the stars. Morrison finally stood, his movements smooth and deliberate. The chamber fell silent as all eyes turned to him. He was not an imposing figure by human standards. Average height, graying hair, and the slight paunch of a career diplomat who spent too much time at desks and not enough time in gymnasiums. But there was something in his bearing, something in the way he carried himself, that demanded attention. Honored delegates, Morrison began, his voice clear and steady. I have listened to your concerns with great interest. You speak of disruption, of primitive behavior, of disturbances to the established order. You paint a picture of humanity as a reckless, destructive force that threatens the careful balance you have maintained. He paused, allowing his words to resonate through the chamber's translation systems. I wonder if I might share a different perspective. High Chancellor Vextar's mandibles clicked with irritation. Ambassador Morrison, this assembly has heard enough human justifications for. With respect, Chancellor, Morrison interrupted gently. I am not offering justifications. I am offering information. Information that I believe this distinguished assembly may find illuminating. The murmur that ran through the chamber carried undertones of curiosity mixed with skepticism. Prince Nexval's crystalline form shifted to a configuration that Morrison had learned indicated intense attention. Proceed, human. But be warned, this assembly has little patience for more of your species' characteristic optimism. Morrison smiled, and something in that expression sent an almost imperceptible ripple through the nearest delegates. Optimism. Yes, that is indeed characteristic of my species. But perhaps you might be interested to know why we possess this trait. and why our expansion has taken the form it has. Dr. Chun activated her portable data display, projecting a three-dimensional star map into the chamber's central presentation area. The map showed a section of space that encompassed roughly 2,000 light-years, with various colors indicating different species, territorial boundaries, and influence zones. "This is the Terran sector," Morrison continued, gesturing to a relatively small cluster of systems highlighted in blue. "What you see here represents humanity's current territorial holdings. 317 systems containing 463 habitable worlds and over 800 research stations and mining operations." Delegate Zur-ADH's tentacles writhed with impatience. "We are already aware of the scope of human expansion, Ambassador. This does not address our concerns about its aggressive nature." "Ah, but it does," Morrison replied, his smile never wavering. "Because what this map does not show is the reason behind our expansion." Dr. Chun, if you would display the secondary data." The star map shifted, and suddenly new information became visible. Red zones appeared throughout the displayed region, marking areas of space that pulsed with an ominous energy signature. These zones were scattered throughout every species' territory, but they were notably absent from human-controlled space. "What you are now seeing," Morrison explained, "are the locations of what we call void tiers, dimensional rifts that have been appearing with increasing frequency over the past 60 years. Each red zone represents an area of space where reality itself has become unstable." The chamber erupted in confused murmuring. High Chancellor Vexstar's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. "Ambassador Morrison, this assembly has no record of such phenomena. If you are attempting to deflect attention from human expansion through fabricated general web," Morrison said calmly, "please share the Kepler Station incident." The general stood, his bearing military straight, despite the alien environment. 18 months ago, a hegemony research station in the Kepler system went silent. The official report listed equipment failure as the cause. The truth is that the station, along with the entire fourth planet of the system, simply ceased to exist. Our deep space monitoring stations recorded the entire event. The projection changed again, showing sensor data from the incident. The assembled delegates watched in horrified silence as a hegemony research facility, along with the planet it orbited, simply vanished from existence, leaving behind an area of space where sensor readings showed nothing. Not empty space, but an absence of space itself. Prince Nexval's crystalline form had shifted to a configuration that Morrison's briefings had identified as extreme concern. Impossible. The Eternal Dynasty's records show no such incident. Because your dynasty, like every other major power in this assembly, has been covering up these incidents to prevent panic, Morrison replied. But humanity has been tracking them since our first deep space expeditions. We have documented over 400 separate incidents across the galaxy. Dr. Chun stepped forward, her scientific training evident in her precise presentation. "The phenomenon appears to be accelerating. Our analysis suggests that these void tiers are not random events, but rather the result of something actively weakening the fabric of reality in certain regions of space." "And what?" High Priestess Alendra asked, her ethereal voice carrying new undertones of concern. "Does this have to do with human expansion?" Morrison turned to face her directly. "Everything. You see, honored priestess, humanity discovered something during our first encounters with these anomalies. Something that has driven our seemingly aggressive expansion across the galaxy." The chamber had fallen into complete silence now. Even the ambient sounds of atmospheric recycling systems seemed muted as every being present focused their attention on the human ambassador. "We are immune," Morrison said simply. "Humans can enter these zones of dimensional instability without being affected. We can work in areas where reality itself is breaking down. We can close the rifts." The silence that followed was absolute. Morrison could feel the weight of hundreds of alien minds processing this information, trying to understand the implications. Delegate Administrator Kylos was the first to find his voice, his skin cycling rapidly through different colors as his emotions shifted. You claim that humans possess some kind of natural resistance to these void tears. Not just resistance, Dr. Chin interjected, calling up additional data. Complete immunity. We have sent human teams into 17 different void tier zones. Not only did they survive, they were able to establish research stations and begin the process of dimensional stabilization. High Chancellor Vextar's mandibles had stopped clicking entirely. Why have you not shared this information with the Council? Morrison's expression grew somber. Because we weren't certain you would believe us. And, more importantly, because we weren't certain how you would react to the knowledge that the newest member of the Council might be the only species capable of dealing with the greatest threat the galaxy has ever faced. The chamber remained silent, but Morrison could sense the shift in atmosphere. Where before there had been disdain and irritation, now there was something else. Uncertainty, fear, and the beginning of understanding. You speak of this as the greatest threat, Prince Nexval said slowly, his crystalline form shifting through configurations too rapidly to interpret. But the incidents you describe, while disturbing, appear to be isolated and random. General Webb stepped forward again. They're not random, and they're accelerating. Our projections suggest that at the current rate of expansion, these void tiers will encompass 15% of habitable galaxy space within the next 50 years. And what of your expansion? Demanded Zeradiach, her tentacles now moving in patterns that Morrison recognized as deep agitation. You claim immunity, but you have been establishing colonies and research stations throughout the galaxy. How does this serve to address these tiers in reality? Morrison nodded, as if he had been expecting this question. Dr. Chun, please display the territorial overlay. The star map shifted once more, and suddenly the pattern became clear. Every human colony, every research station, every seemingly aggressive expansion had been precisely positioned to form a network around the known void tier zones. The human territory wasn't a random expansion. It was a carefully constructed containment grid. For the past 47 years, Morrison explained, humanity has been quietly building a network of monitoring and response stations designed to track and contain the spread of dimensional instability. Every world we have colonized, every outpost we have established, has been positioned to serve this purpose. The implications hit the chamber like a wave. The aggressive human expansion that had so concerned the Council had actually been a desperate attempt to protect galactic civilization from a threat that most species couldn't even perceive, let alone address. The reason you find our expansion disturbing, Morrison continued, is because you can sense on some level that we are not behaving like a normal species. We're not expanding for resources or territory or political power. We are expanding because we're the only ones who can stand between galactic civilization and an existential threat that would destroy everything you have built. High Priestess Salandra's form had become noticeably more solid, a sign that Morrison's briefings had identified as extreme emotional engagement. The disturbances in the cosmic energy we detected, they were not caused by human presence. They were caused by human absence. You have been shielding us from something we could not perceive. Yes, Morrison said simply, and now you understand why our diplomatic approach has seemed unconventional. We have been trying to figure out how to tell you that your newest council member might be your only hope for survival. The silence that followed was different from before. This was not the silence of surprise or confusion. This was the silence of beings processing information that fundamentally changed their understanding of the universe they lived in. Delegate Administrator Kylos spoke first, his skin now a pale silver that Morrison's briefings indicated represented deep contemplation. If what you say is true, then humanity has been protecting the galaxy while we have been criticizing them for disrupting our political balance. The question, said Prince Nexval, his crystalline form now locked in a configuration that suggested intense focus, is what happens next. If these void tiers are indeed accelerating, and if humans are truly the only species capable of addressing them, then we face a situation that no one in this chamber is prepared for. Morrison nodded gravely. That is precisely why we have chosen to reveal this information now. The threat is accelerating beyond our ability to contain it with our current resources. We need the support of the galactic community, not for conquest, not for political advantage, but for survival. High Chancellor Vextar's mandibles began clicking again, but slowly, thoughtfully. Ambassador Morrison, you're asking this assembly to fundamentally reconsider our understanding of galactic politics, of species interaction, and of the very nature of the threats we face. I'm asking this assembly to consider the possibility, Morrison replied, that the greatest threat to galactic civilization is not political or military, but dimensional, and that sometimes the species that appears to be the most disruptive to the established order might actually be trying to save it. The chamber remained silent, but Morrison could sense the change. The mockery and disdain that had greeted his delegation at the beginning of the session had evaporated, replaced by something much more complex. Fear, uncertainty, and the beginning of understanding that their universe was far more dangerous than they had imagined. As the session drew to a close, Morrison remained standing, knowing that everything that followed would depend on how the assembled species processed this information. Humanity had just revealed their greatest secret, their greatest strength, and their greatest burden to the galaxy. The silence that followed would indeed change everything. The emergency session convened 3 days after Morrison's revelation, but the Great Assembly Hall felt different now. Where before there had been the casual chatter of routine politics, now hushed conversations filled the air with tension and uncertainty. Representatives huddled in their species-specific groups, their body language betraying the anxiety that had gripped the galactic political establishment since learning about the void tiers. Morrison sat with his delegation in their modest section, noting how the dynamic had shifted. Previously, delegates had pointedly ignored the human presence or regarded them with barely concealed contempt. Now, alien gazes lingered on the human section with expressions that ranged from fearful curiosity to grudging respect. Several species had requested private audiences with the human delegation, requests that Morrison had politely deferred until after the council reached some form of consensus. High Chancellor Vextar called the assembly to order, his usually confident demeanor noticeably subdued. The massive insectoid's mandibles clicked in irregular patterns that Morrison had learned indicated deep uncertainty. "Esteemed delegates," he began, his voice carrying through the translation matrix with uncharacteristic hesitation. "We reconvene to address the information presented by the human delegation 3 days ago." The chamber fell silent with an intensity that felt almost physical. Prince Nexval rose from his crystalline platform, his form cycling through configurations that Morrison's briefings identified as deep contemplation mixed with concern. "Honored Chancellor, I believe I speak for many in this assembly when I say that the human claims require extraordinary verification. The existence of dimensional rifts that threaten galactic stability, and the assertion that a single species possesses unique immunity to these phenomena, represents a fundamental challenge to our understanding of reality itself." Morrison had expected this response. The galactic community had spent millennia building their understanding of physics, dimensional theory, and the nature of space-time itself. The idea that large sections of space could simply cease to exist violated numerous established scientific principles that formed the foundation of advanced civilization. Dr. Chun activated her data display, projecting new information into the chamber's central presentation area. "Honored delegates," she began, her scientific training evident in her measured tone, "I understand your skepticism. The phenomena we describe do indeed challenge conventional understanding of dimensional physics. However, we have compiled additional evidence that may help clarify the situation." The display showed a timeline spanning 60 years, with incident markers scattered across the galactic map. Each marker represented a documented case of spatial anomalies, equipment failures, or unexplained disappearances. When viewed individually, each incident appeared to be an isolated event. But when displayed together, a clear pattern emerged. The incidents were increasing in frequency and spreading in a predictable pattern from specific points of origin. Delegate Zur-ADH rose from her water tank, her tentacles moving in agitated patterns. Even accepting the existence of these anomalies, the claim that humans alone possess immunity remains unsubstantiated. How do we know that other species have not simply avoided these areas rather than being affected by them? General Webb stood to respond, his military bearing commanding attention even in the alien environment. Because we have documentation of what happens when non-human life forms encounter these zones. Dr. Chun, please display the Rigel incident analysis. The projection shifted to show sensor data from a research station in the Rigel system. The assembled delegates watched as a Zephyrian exploration vessel approached an area of space that appeared normal on all sensors. The moment the ship entered the designated zone, it simply stopped existing. Not destroyed, not vaporized, but removed from reality so completely that even the light it had been emitting vanished instantly. The Zephyrian Empire classified this as equipment failure, Webb continued. But our deep space monitoring stations recorded the entire event. The ship didn't explode or malfunction. It ceased to exist in any measurable way. High Priestess Salandra's ethereal form became more solid as she focused her attention on the human delegation. You speak of immunity, but have you tested this claim? Have humans deliberately entered these zones? Morrison nodded grimly. Yes, and those missions are why we know the true scope of the threat we face. Dr. Chun called up new data, showing detailed reports from human exploration teams that had entered void tier zones. The information was comprehensive: biological readings, environmental data, dimensional measurements, and, most importantly, the team's ability to not only survive in these zones, but to establish functional research stations within them. Our first expedition into a void tier zone occurred 17 years ago, Dr. Chen explained. A volunteer team of scientists and military personnel entered the Vega anomaly zone. Not only did they survive, they were able to establish a research station that has been operational ever since. The chamber erupted in murmurs of disbelief and concern. Delegate Administrator Kylos's skin cycled through rapid color changes as he processed the information. You have been operating research stations in areas that destroy other species for 17 years? And you said nothing? We said nothing, Morrison replied calmly, because we needed to understand the phenomenon before we could explain it, and because we weren't certain how galactic civilization would react to learning that reality itself was under attack. Prince Nexval's crystalline form locked into a configuration that Morrison recognized as intense analytical focus. Explain under attack. Your previous presentation suggested these were random phenomena. Morrison exchanged glances with Dr. Chun before standing. Because we weren't certain until recently. But our research has revealed something that changes the nature of this threat entirely. The star map reappeared, but this time it showed the galaxy from a much broader perspective. The void tier zones were still marked, but now additional data overlays revealed something that sent a chill through the assembled delegates. The tiers weren't random. They formed a pattern, a systematic weakening of space-time that was spreading inward from the galaxy's edge. The void tiers are not natural phenomena, Morrison announced. They are the result of external intervention. Something from outside our galaxy is systematically weakening the fabric of reality, creating these zones of dimensional instability as a prelude to something else. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the mechanical sounds of the chamber's life support systems seemed muted as hundreds of alien minds struggled to process the implications of this revelation. High Chancellor Vexstar's mandibles had stopped clicking entirely. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an undertone of fear that Morrison had never heard from the confident Chancellor. You are suggesting that our galaxy is under attack by an external force capable of manipulating reality itself. That is exactly what we're suggesting, Dr. Chen confirmed. Our research teams have detected consistent energy signatures associated with each void tier. The signatures are not generated from within our galaxy. They originate from extragalactic space. Zur-ADH's tentacles writhed in patterns that Morrison recognized as extreme agitation. And humans are immune to this attack. Humans can function normally in areas where reality has been weakened, Morrison corrected. We don't know why. We don't know if it's an accident of evolution, some unique aspect of human consciousness, or something else entirely. What we do know is that we can enter these zones, study them, and potentially develop countermeasures. The implications were staggering. If humanity was indeed unique in their ability to function in dimensionally unstable regions, they represented not just the galaxy's best hope for defense, but possibly its only hope. Prince Nexval rose again, his crystalline form shifting through rapid configurations. Assuming the validity of your claims, this places the galactic community in an unprecedented situation. We face a threat that most species cannot even perceive, let alone combat, while the newest member of our council claims unique ability to address this threat. Morrison could sense the underlying tension in the prince's statement. The political implications were enormous. If humanity was truly the only species capable of defending against this extragalactic threat, it fundamentally altered the balance of power in galactic civilization. We understand the difficult position this creates, Morrison acknowledged. No species wants to be dependent on another for their survival. But we are not seeking political advantage or dominance. We are seeking cooperation in the face of an existential threat. High Priestess Salandra's form solidified further as she focused on Morrison. Yet cooperation would require that the established powers of this galaxy place their trust in a species that has been among us for less than 2 years. You ask us to believe not only in the existence of this threat, but in human uniqueness as the solution. General Webb stepped forward. We're not asking you to take our word for it. We're prepared to provide proof. The chamber stirred with new interest. Delegate Administrator Kylos leaned forward, his skin settling into a pale blue that indicated intense curiosity. What kind of proof? Morrison had hoped they wouldn't reach this point, but he had prepared for it. We propose a joint expedition. Representatives from interested species can accompany human teams into an active void tier zone. You can witness the phenomenon firsthand and verify our claims through your own sensors and scientific instruments. The proposal sent a wave of shock through the assembly. The idea of deliberately entering what humans claimed were zones of dimensional instability was either brave or insane, depending on one's perspective. High Chancellor Vextar's mandibles clicked rapidly. You propose to risk the lives of council delegates in unproven phenomena. We propose to demonstrate the reality of the threat and the validity of our claims, Morrison replied. The expedition would be carefully planned and completely voluntary. Only delegates who choose to participate would be included. Prince Nexval's crystalline form had locked into a configuration that Morrison couldn't interpret. And what the non-human participants? If these zones are indeed lethal to other species, how do you propose to protect them? Dr. Chun activated her display again, showing technical specifications for specialized containment suits. We have developed protective equipment based on our analysis of human immunity. While we cannot guarantee complete protection, our tests suggest that properly shielded individuals can survive limited exposure to dimensional instability. The technology was impressive, containment suits that created localized reality anchors, allowing non-human individuals to maintain their existence even in areas where space-time had been compromised. The suits were bulky and complex, requiring massive energy sources and constant monitoring, but they represented humanity's attempt to share their unique advantage with other species. These suits have been tested? Asked Salandra. Extensively, Webb confirmed. We've had volunteer subjects from several different species work alongside human teams for limited periods. The technology works, though it's not perfect. So HFY's tentacles writhe thoughtfully. You speak of volunteer subjects. Which species have participated in these tests? Morrison hesitated. This was the most sensitive aspect of their revelation. We have had cooperation from elements within several of the Council species. However, these collaborations were conducted without official government approval. The chamber erupted in angry voices. The idea that humans had been conducting secret experiments with members of various species without council oversight was exactly the kind of behavior that had initially aroused suspicion about human intentions. High Chancellor Vextar rose to his full height, his mandibles clicking in patterns that Morrison recognized as severe displeasure. Ambassador Morrison, you admit to conducting unauthorized experiments with citizens of council member species. We admit to seeking cooperation from individuals who were willing to help address what we believe to be an existential threat. Morrison replied carefully. Every participant was fully informed and completely voluntary. Nevertheless, Prince Nexval interjected, his crystalline form shifting to configurations that suggested deep concern. Such activities represent a significant breach of diplomatic protocol. How are we to trust human claims when you have already demonstrated willingness to work outside established frameworks? Morrison had anticipated this criticism, but it still stung because it was partially valid. Humanity's approach had been necessarily secretive, but that secrecy had inevitably involved actions that could be interpreted as deceptive or manipulative. Because Dr. Chun said, stepping forward with data that she had clearly been holding in reserve, the participants in our research included individuals you know and respect. The display activated again, showing testimony from the research participants. The chamber fell silent as familiar voices began speaking, scientists, military officers, and even some political figures from various species describing their experiences in void tier zones. Commander Zithera of the Hegemony Fleet appeared first, his chitinous features clearly visible as he spoke. I volunteered for human research because I had lost 3 ships to what we were calling equipment failures. The humans showed me the truth, that we were losing vessels to something that our science couldn't understand or detect. Dr. Velnara of the Crystalline Collective followed, her silicon-based form shimmering as she spoke. The experience of entering a dimensionally unstable zone while wearing human protective equipment was enlightening. I witnessed the destruction of a test probe that was not protected, and I can confirm that the phenomenon is real and extremely dangerous. The testimony continued for several minutes, each speaker providing independent verification of human claims about void tiers, dimensional instability, and the effectiveness of human immunity. More importantly, each speaker was a respected member of their own species, lending credibility to the human assertions. When the testimonies ended, the chamber remained silent. The assembled delegates were processing not just the information about the threat, but the revelation that elements within their own governments and scientific communities have been secretly collaborating with humans for years. Delegate Administrator Kylos was the first to speak, his skin now a deep golden color that Morrison had learned indicated complex emotional states. The humans have built a network of cooperation without our knowledge. Whether this represents foresight or manipulation remains to be determined. It represents necessity, Morrison replied. When we first discovered the threat, we faced a choice: reveal information that would cause galaxy-wide panic, or quietly seek cooperation from individuals who could help us understand and address the danger. We chose the path that we believed would cause the least disruption while maximizing our ability to protect galactic civilization. High Priestess Solandra's form had become almost completely solid now, indicating intense emotional engagement. You made decisions for the galaxy without consulting the galaxy. How is this different from conquest? Because conquest seeks to control or dominate. Morrison answered, we seek only to protect. Everything we have done, every action we have taken, has been directed toward a single goal: preventing the destruction of galactic civilization. Prince Nexval's crystalline form shifted to a new configuration. Yet your protection comes with conditions. You possess unique capabilities that make you indispensable, creating a situation where the galaxy becomes dependent on human cooperation for its survival. Morrison nodded gravely. That is the unfortunate reality of the situation. We didn't choose to be immune to dimensional instability. We didn't choose to be the only species capable of addressing this threat. But we are, and we have a responsibility to act on that capability. The truth was uncomfortable for everyone in the chamber. The established galactic powers were being asked to accept that their survival depended on the newest and least politically significant member of the Council. For humans, the burden of being the galaxy's protectors was equally challenging, especially when that protection required them to act in ways that appeared secretive or manipulative. High Chancellor Vextar's mandibles clicked slowly as he processed the full implications of the situation. Ambassador Morrison, you have presented information that fundamentally challenges our understanding of galactic security, species relationships, and the nature of reality itself. This assembly requires time to consider these revelations. Morrison remained standing. Chancellor, I appreciate the magnitude of what we have shared. However, I must emphasize that time is not a luxury we possess in abundance. Our projections suggest that the void tiers will expand significantly within the next 5 years. If we are to develop effective countermeasures, cooperation must begin immediately. The chamber stirred with unease. The urgency of the threat conflicted with the careful deliberation that characterized galactic politics. You ask us to abandon established processes in favor of immediate action, Prince Nexval observed. How do we balance caution with urgency when the stakes are so high? Morrison looked around the chamber, meeting the alien gazes that were focused on him with new understanding. By remembering that sometimes the greatest risk is inaction. The galaxy can survive political disruption, economic uncertainty, or even limited warfare. But it cannot survive the systematic destruction of reality itself. As the session drew to a close, Morrison could sense that the fundamental dynamic had shifted once again. The mockery and contempt that had greeted humanity's presence in the Council had been replaced by fear, uncertainty, and reluctant recognition that the galaxy's newest members might also be its most important. The silence that followed would determine whether that recognition led to cooperation or to something far more dangerous. The joint expedition assembled at Waypoint Station, a massive orbital facility that served as humanity's primary research hub for dimensional studies. Located at the edge of human space, the station had been specifically designed to support operations in dimensionally unstable regions. Its hull was constructed from reality anchor materials that could maintain structural integrity even when space-time itself became fluid. Ambassador Morrison stood in the station's main observation deck, watching as ships from 7 different species docked with the facility. The expedition had taken 2 months to organize, 2 months of intense negotiations, political maneuvering, and careful planning. Not every council species had chosen to participate. The risks were considered too great by many. But those who had sent representatives included the most scientifically advanced and militarily powerful civilizations in the galaxy. Prince Nexval had come personally, his crystalline form housed in a specially designed environmental suit that could maintain his silicon-based physiology in the event of dimensional disruption. The hegemony had sent their most experienced deep space commander, General Kextar, along with a full scientific team. The Aquatic Federation's representative was Dr. Miranda, their foremost expert on spatial physics, while the Spiritual Confluence had dispatched High Acolyte Zendara to observe what they termed the wounds in cosmic consciousness. Dr. Chan moved through the assembled delegates, conducting final briefings on the protective equipment that would keep them alive in the void tier zone they were about to enter. The suits were marvels of human engineering. Reality anchors, dimensional stabilizers, and consciousness buffers all integrated into life support systems that could function even when the basic laws of physics became unreliable. The most important thing to remember, Dr. Chan explained to the mixed group of alien scientists and military personnel, is that normal sensor readings become meaningless in a void tier zone. Your instruments will attempt to measure phenomena that no longer exist in conventional terms. Trust the human readings, trust your safety protocols, and do not attempt to remove your helmets or breach your suits under any circumstances. Commander Zithera of the Hegemony, who had participated in earlier human research, served as an unofficial liaison for the nervous delegates. His presence lent credibility to human claims and helped ease the anxiety that permeated the expedition team. The experience is disturbing, he warned his fellow non-humans. You will see things that your mind insists cannot exist. Equipment that functions perfectly in normal space will behave in ways that seem impossible. The key is to remember that the humans have been working in these conditions for years. They know what they're doing. General Webb coordinated the expedition's military aspects, ensuring that both human and alien security personnel understood the protocols for operating in dimensionally unstable regions. The military considerations were complex. Traditional weapons often failed to function in void tier zones, and communication systems required special modifications to transmit across dimensional barriers. The target zone was designated Void Tier Sigma 7, located in what had once been the outer system of a red giant star. The star itself still existed, but 3 of its planets had vanished completely, leaving behind areas of space where sensor readings returned impossible values. Negative mass, inverted time flows, and gravitational field that pulled in directions that didn't exist. Morrison joined the expedition team as they boarded the specially modified human research vessel Endurance. The ship had been designed specifically for operations in dimensionally unstable regions, its hull incorporating reality anchor technology, and its sensors calibrated to function in areas where normal physics no longer applied. As they approached the void tier zone, the first signs of dimensional instability became apparent. The ship's sensors began registering conflicting readings, the same object appearing to be in multiple locations simultaneously, gravitational fields that pointed toward empty space, and energy signatures that violated conservation laws. Beginning dimensional transition, announced Captain Rodriguez from the ship's bridge. All non-human personnel, please confirm your suit status. The alien delegates checked their protective equipment one final time. Prince Nexval's crystalline form was completely enclosed within a reality anchor field, while Dr. Moran floated in a specially designed mobility tank that could maintain aquatic conditions even if the surrounding space-time became unstable. The moment of transition was unmistakable. One instant they were in normal space, with stars visible through the viewports and sensors providing reliable data. The next, they had crossed an invisible boundary into a region where reality operated by different rules. High Acolyte Zendara was the first to react, her ethereal form becoming almost solid as she encountered the dimensional distortions. "The cosmic consciousness is wounded here," she whispered, her voice carrying undertones of distress that the translation matrix struggled to convey. It is as if reality itself is in pain. The viewports showed an impossible vista. The red giant star was visible, but it appeared to be simultaneously in front of them, behind them, and passing through their ship. The missing planets existed as ghostly outlines, present in some dimensions, but absent in others. Space itself seemed to ripple like water, with waves of distortion propagating through areas that should have been empty. Dr. Chin monitored the alien delegates carefully, watching for signs of dimensional exposure despite their protective equipment. Remember, your senses will tell you that what you're seeing is impossible. In normal space, it would be. Here, impossibility is the baseline condition. General Kextar, despite his experience with military situations, found himself gripping his restraints as the ship maneuvered through the zone. How do you navigate in conditions like this? Our instruments are providing completely contradictory information. Captain Rodriguez answered from bridge. We've learned to rely on human intuition supplemented by specialized sensors. Navigation in void tiers requires understanding that linear movement doesn't always produce linear results. Sometimes you have to travel backwards to move forward. As if to demonstrate this point, the ship performed a maneuver that should have taken them away from their destination, but instead brought them closer to the research station that human teams had established in the zone center. The station itself was a marvel of engineering, a facility that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, allowing it to maintain stability even in the chaotic environment of the Void Tier. Prince Nexval's crystalline form shifted through configurations that Morrison had never seen before, suggesting emotional states that had no equivalent in normal experience. The station, it exists, but it doesn't exist. My sensors detected in 17 different spatial coordinates simultaneously. That's because it does exist in 17 different coordinates, Dr. Chen explained. The station is anchored across multiple dimensional layers. It's the only way to maintain structural integrity in a region where space itself is unstable. As they docked with the station, the alien delegates experienced their first direct contact with long-term dimensional instability. The docking process involved phases of existence. The ship had to synchronize its dimensional frequency with the station's reality anchors before physical contact could be established. Dr. Miranda's tentacles writhed in her protective tank as she observed the docking procedure. This is beyond anything in our scientific understanding. How is it possible that humans have adapted to work in these conditions? We don't know, Morrison admitted. We've studied human immunity to dimensional instability for 20 years, and we still don't understand the mechanism. We just know that it works. Inside the research station, the alien delegates encountered human teams who had been working in the Void Tier zone for months. The humans moved and worked normally, seemingly unaffected by the dimensional distortions that made the alien visitors feel disoriented and nauseated despite their protective equipment. Dr. Sarah Hoffman, the station's chief researcher, greeted the expedition team in the main laboratory. Around them, human scientists conducted experiments that would have been impossible in normal space, studying matter that existed in negative states, observing time flows that moved backwards, and analyzing energy patterns that violated fundamental physical laws. "Welcome to the impossible," Dr. Hoffman said with a slight smile. "I know this is overwhelming, but I want you to understand something important. Everything you see here is real. The impossible physics, the contradictory sensor readings, the violations of natural law, they're all genuine phenomena." She led the group to an observation window that looked out into the Void Tier's interior. What they saw defied description: space that folded in on itself, matter that existed in multiple states simultaneously, and energy patterns that formed geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly. "The most disturbing aspect," Dr. Hoffman continued, "is that this isn't random chaos. There's a pattern to the dimensional instability, a structure that suggests deliberate engineering. Whatever is creating these Void Tiers understands physics far better than we do." High Acolyte Zendara pressed close to the observation window, her ethereal form becoming more solid as she focused on the phenomena outside. "There is intelligence behind this destruction. I can sense purpose in the cosmic wounds." Dr. Hoffman nodded grimly. "That's what our research has concluded as well. The Void Tiers aren't natural phenomena or accidental dimensional damage. They're weapons designed to weaken the fabric of reality in preparation for something else." General Kekstar's mandibles clicked in patterns that Morrison recognized as extreme concern. "Weapons imply warfare. Are you suggesting that our galaxy is under attack?" "We're suggesting that our galaxy is being prepared for invasion," Dr. Chen answered. "The Void Tiers aren't the attack itself. They're the preliminary phase. Something is systematically weakening our reality to make it vulnerable to forces that operate by different physical laws." The implications hit the alien delegates with the force of physical blows. They had come expecting to witness strange phenomena that might validate human claims about dimensional instability. Instead, they were confronting evidence of an organized assault on reality itself. Prince Nexval's crystalline form locked into a configuration that suggested deep analytical focus. You speak of invasion from entities that operate by different physical laws. What evidence supports this conclusion? Dr. Hoffman activated the station's main display, showing data the human teams had collected over years of research in void tier zones. The information was staggering. Evidence of probe activities, dimensional scanning operations, and, most disturbing of all, brief intrusions by entities that existed only partially in normal space-time. We've detected reconnaissance activities, she explained. Entities that phase in and out of our dimensional framework, conducting what can only be described as survey operations. They're studying our galaxy, cataloging our defenses, and preparing for something larger. The display showed sensor logs of these intrusions, brief contacts with intelligences that existed across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. The entities appeared to be immune to the dimensional instability that affected most galactic species, suggesting they were responsible for creating the void tiers in the first place. Dr. Miranda's tentacles writhed in agitation as she studied the data. These entities, they're similar to humans in their ability to function in dimensionally unstable regions. Similar, but far more advanced, Dr. Hoffman confirmed. Where humans can survive and work in void tier zones, these entities seem to exist naturally across multiple dimensional layers. They're not adapted to dimensional instability, they're native to it. Commander Zithera, despite his previous exposure to human research, found the implications deeply disturbing. If these entities are responsible for the void tiers, and if they're preparing for invasion, then our galaxy faces a threat that none of our species can address except humans. Morrison had been dreading this moment, the point where the alien delegates fully grasped the scope of the threat and humanity's unique position as the galaxy's only viable defense. The political implications were staggering, but the survival implications were worse. That's why we've been so aggressive in our expansion, Morrison explained. We're not trying to conquer territory or establish dominance. We're trying to build a defensive network that can detect, monitor, and potentially repel an invasion by entities that most species can't even perceive. High Acolyte Zendara turned from the observation window, her ethereal form more solid than Morrison had ever seen it. The cosmic wounds are not healing. They're spreading. How long do we have before these invaders complete their preparations? Dr. Hoffman's expression grew even more grim. Based on the rate of void tier expansion and the increasing frequency of reconnaissance intrusions, we estimate between 3 and 7 years before full-scale invasion begins. The silence that followed was absolute. The alien delegates processed the information that their galaxy faced an existential threat that would arrive within their lifetimes, and that their survival depended on cooperation with a species they had been dismissing as disruptive newcomers. General Kextar broke the silence first. 3 to 7 years to prepare for war against enemies that can manipulate reality itself, and humans are our only viable defense force. We're the only species that can operate effectively in the battle zones where this war will be fought, Morrison corrected. But we can't win alone. We need the industrial capacity, the scientific resources, and the military traditions of the entire galactic community. Prince Nexval's crystalline form shifted to a new configuration. You're proposing to militarize galactic civilization in preparation for dimensional warfare. We're proposing to save galactic civilization by preparing for the fight of our lives, Morrison replied. The entities creating these void tiers have capabilities that dwarf anything in our experience. Our only advantage is that they seem to have underestimated human immunity to dimensional manipulation. As the expedition team prepared to return to normal space, each alien delegate carried with them not just confirmation of human claims, but the crushing knowledge that their universe was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The silence that had followed Morrison's initial revelation was nothing compared to the silence that would follow when the rest of the galaxy learned what they had witnessed. The war for reality itself was coming, and humanity would stand at the center of galactic civilization's desperate attempt to survive. The war began not with invasion fleets or energy weapons, but with reality itself turning against the defenders. Morrison stood in the newly constructed Galactic Defense Command Center, watching displays that showed the systematic collapse of space-time across 17 sectors. What had started as isolated void tiers had become a cascade failure. Entire regions of the galaxy where the laws of physics no longer applied consistently. 2 years had passed since the joint expedition. 2 years of frantic preparation as galactic civilization struggled to ready itself for a conflict beyond anything in their collective experience. The Great Assembly had been transformed from a political forum into a war council, with species that had maintained careful diplomatic distances for millennia now working together in desperate cooperation. High Chancellor Vextar, his chitinous form now bearing scars from dimensional exposure during a reconnaissance mission, coordinated the defense efforts from the command center's primary station. The massive insectoid had become an unlikely ally of humanity. His initially skeptical nature transformed into grim determination after witnessing firsthand what the dimensional invaders could do to unprotected space. Sector Gamma 7 has gone completely unstable, reported Dr. Chun, her hair now prematurely gray from the stress of coordinating humanity's scientific contribution to the defense effort. We're losing 3-star systems per hour in that region. The main display showed the terrifying reality of the invasion. Not ships or armies, but zones of dimensional chaos that spread like a virus through normal space. Where these zones expanded, entire worlds simply ceased to exist, their matter and energy dissolved into contradictory states that violated every known law of physics. Prince Nexval's crystalline form, now permanently reconfigured to enhance his ability to process dimensional data, interfaced directly with the command center's computational systems. The pattern suggests coordinated assault. The dimensional destabilization is not random. It's following strategic objectives. Morrison nodded grimly as he studied the tactical displays. The invading entities had revealed themselves to be far more sophisticated than anyone had anticipated. They didn't simply create dimensional chaos. They sculpted it, shaping areas of unstable space-time to serve specific purposes. Some zones seemed designed to disrupt communications across vast distances, while others created barriers that prevented conventional space travel. General Webb, now promoted to Supreme Commander of Human Defense Forces, highlighted critical areas on the strategic map. They're isolating our major population centers. Look at the pattern. Every void tier expansion is positioned to cut off trade routes and communication links between core worlds. The enemy's strategy was becoming clear. Rather than directly attacking defended positions, they were undermining the infrastructure that held galactic civilization together. Worlds that had relied on interstellar commerce for basic necessities found themselves cut off as dimensional barriers made space travel impossible. Communication networks that had connected thousands of species across the galaxy fell silent as reality distortions scrambled subspace signals. Dr. Miranda, her aquatic form, now housed in a specialized command tank that allowed her to work continuously with human teams, analyzed the invasion's economic impact. Resource distribution networks have collapsed across 40% of inhabited space. We're facing galaxy-wide supply shortages within 6 months if we can't restore stable shipping lanes. The aliens who had once mocked humanity's aggressive expansion now understood why humans had been so desperate to establish their network of monitoring stations. Every human outpost had become a critical node in the Galactic Defense Network, providing the only reliable communication and sensor coverage in regions where dimensional instability made conventional systems useless. High Acolyte Zendara, her ethereal form now perpetually solid due to constant exposure to dimensional distortions, served as an early warning system for new areas of instability. Her species' sensitivity to cosmic consciousness allowed her to detect dimensional weakening before it became visible to conventional sensors. New disturbance forming in Sector Beta 3, she announced, her voice carrying overtones of pain that Morrison had learned to associate with reality wounds. The cosmic fabric is tearing along a 12-light-year front. Morrison immediately activated the Human Response Network. Across 17 sectors, human teams prepared to deploy into the new Void Tier zone before it could fully destabilize. This was the pattern that had emerged. Humans could enter newly forming tiers and sometimes prevent their expansion, but only if they arrived before the dimensional damage became irreversible. Strike Team 7, deploy to Beta 3, Morrison commanded. Priority Alpha, stabilization operations, full reality anchor deployment. The response was immediate. Human ships equipped with dimensional stabilization technology accelerated toward the forming tier, their crews prepared to work in conditions that would kill most other species within minutes. These were volunteers, men and women who had dedicated their lives to standing between galactic civilization and an enemy that existed only partially in their reality. Captain Rodriguez, now commanding the largest fleet of dimensionally capable vessels in the galaxy, coordinated the deployment from her flagship Defiance. The ship itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, human dimensional technology integrated with Zephyrian shield systems, crystalline computational matrices, and hegemony weapons platforms. Approaching the disturbance zone, she reported. Dimensional readings are fluctuating between stable and critical. We have a narrow window for intervention. Morrison watched the tactical display as human teams entered the forming void tier. The process never became routine, no matter how many times they had performed it. Each stabilization mission required teams to literally hold space-time together through a combination of technology and human willpower that no one fully understood. The dimensional invaders had not remained passive during the galaxy's mobilization efforts. As human teams worked to contain new void tiers, the entities began adapting their tactics. Reconnaissance intrusions became active harassment, with partial manifestations appearing in normal space to attack stabilization operations. Contact came the urgent transmission from Strike Team 7. Multiple entities manifesting around the tear perimeter. They're trying to prevent our approach to the dimensional anchor points. Morrison could see the battle unfolding on his displays, though battle was perhaps inadequate to describe combat between beings that existed in normal space and entities that phased between dimensions. Human weapons have been modified to fire across dimensional barriers, while the invading entities employed attacks that targeted reality itself rather than physical matter. General Kextar, his mandibles clicking in patterns Morrison had learned to interpret as tactical analysis, coordinated support operations from his position at the military command station. Deploying dimensional artillery. Target the entity manifestation points. The weapons that galactic civilization had developed for dimensional warfare were unlike anything in their previous military experience. Instead of destroying matter or energy, these weapons disrupted the dimensional foundations that allowed the invading entities to manifest in normal space. Success was measured not in enemies killed, but in reality preserved. Dr. Chen monitored the stabilization progress from her scientific station. Anchor Point Alpha is secure. Beta is under heavy attack, but holding. If we can establish Anchor Gamma, the tear should begin to contract. Morrison felt the familiar tension that accompanied every stabilization mission. Success meant preserving another piece of normal space-time. Failure meant watching reality itself dissolve as the dimensional tear expanded beyond their ability to contain it. Gamma anchor deployed, Captain Rodriguez reported. Dimensional field is stabilizing. The tear is beginning to contract. A collective sigh of relief filled the command center as the tactical display showed the forming void tier shrinking back to manageable size. But Morrison knew that this victory, like all their victories, was temporary. For every tear they successfully contained, 3 more formed somewhere else in the galaxy. Prince Nexval's crystalline form shifted to a configuration that Morrison recognized as deep concern. The rate of new tier formation is exceeding our containment capacity. We cannot maintain this defensive posture indefinitely. Morrison had reached the same conclusion weeks ago, but hearing it confirmed by the Crystalline Collective's finest analytical mind made it impossible to ignore. Humanity was fighting a defensive war against an enemy that could create new fronts faster than they could respond to them. They needed a way to take the offensive. Dr. Chun, Morrison said, turning to the chief scientist. What's the status of the Deep Reconnaissance Project? Dr. Chen's expression grew grim. Preliminary data suggests that the entities are operating from a base of operations located in extragalactic space. We've tracked their dimensional manipulations to a source point approximately 2 million light-years beyond the galactic rim. The information represented both an opportunity and a terrifying challenge. If the invading entities had a centralized base of operations, it might be possible to strike at the source of the dimensional attacks. But mounting an expedition to extragalactic space would require resources that the galaxy could barely spare from its defensive efforts. High Chancellor Vextar's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. An offensive operation against an extragalactic target would require unprecedented cooperation between species. The logistics alone would be staggering. Morrison nodded. But it might be our only chance to end this war before dimensional degradation makes large portions of the galaxy uninhabitable. The strategic debate that followed consumed hours as representatives from dozens of species argued over resource allocation, command structure, and the fundamental question of whether galactic civilization should risk everything on a single desperate offensive operation. High Acolyte Zendara provided the deciding argument. The cosmic consciousness itself is failing, she announced, her solid form flickering with distress. If the dimensional degradation continues at its current rate, reality will become so weakened that even humans will lose their immunity. We have perhaps 1 year before the cumulative damage becomes irreversible. The silence that followed was different from the uncertainty that had characterized earlier debates. This was the silence of beings confronting their own mortality, not as individuals, but as civilizations. Morrison stood, knowing that what he said next would determine the galaxy's fate. Then we build the largest fleet in galactic history. We pool every resource, every technology, and every strategic advantage we possess. And we take the fight to them before they can finish destroying our reality. High Chancellor Vextar rose to his full impressive height. The hegemony commits its full industrial capacity to this effort. Prince Nexval's crystalline form shifted to a configuration Morrison had never seen before. The Eternal Dynasty offers our computational resources and dimensional manipulation technology. One by one, every species represented in the command center committed to the offensive operation. The same civilizations that had mocked humanity's presence in the council chambers now pledged their survival to human leadership in the greatest military undertaking in galactic history. Dr. Chun activated the preliminary fleet specifications that human strategists had been developing in secret for months. The proposed force was staggering. 10,000 ships equipped with dimensional stabilization technology, crewed by volunteers from every species, but commanded by humans who alone could function effectively in the dimensional chaos surrounding the enemy's base of operations. Construction timeline is 18 months, she announced. Every major shipyard in the galaxy will need to be converted to dimensional warfare specifications. We'll need to train over 50,000 non-human personnel in dimensional combat operations. And we'll need to develop weapons capable of functioning in extragalactic space where the normal laws of physics may not apply. Morrison looked around the command center at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. 2 years ago, these beings had viewed humanity with suspicion and contempt. Now they were preparing to entrust their species' survival to human leadership in a war against entities that could rewrite reality itself. The silence that followed our first revelation changed everything, Morrison said quietly. But the silence that follows this decision will determine whether galactic civilization has a future. As the planning began for what historians would later call the Great Crusade, Morrison reflected on the strange path that had brought humanity from the galaxy's newest members to its last hope. They had been mocked in the council chambers for their aggressive expansion and their disruption of established political balance. Now, that same aggressive expansion had created the only infrastructure capable of mounting a defense against interdimensional invasion. The entities that had begun this war had made one critical miscalculation. They had assumed that reality's defenders would be bound by the same limitations that made them vulnerable to dimensional manipulation. They had not counted on the existence of a species that could stand firm when space-time itself became fluid, that could fight effectively when the battlefield existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Humanity had never asked to be the galaxy's protectors. They had never sought the responsibility of standing between civilization and entities that treated reality itself as a weapon. But when that responsibility had fallen to them, they had accepted it without hesitation. The war for reality was far from over. The offensive operation that would determine the galaxy's fate was still months away. But as Morrison watched the greatest alliance in galactic history take shape around human leadership, he knew that whatever the outcome, the universe would never again underestimate the species that had once been mocked in the council chambers. The silence that had followed humanity's revelation had indeed changed everything. Now it remained to be seen whether that change would be enough to save not just galactic civilization, but reality itself from entities that viewed existence as nothing more than a resource to be consumed. In 18 months, the galaxy would have its answer. Until then, humans would continue to stand guard over the wounded cosmos, protecting a reality that most species couldn't even perceive was under attack. The greatest test of humanity's determination was yet to come, but they would face it as they had faced everything else since arriving among the stars, together, determined, and absolutely refusing to surrender while any hope remained.